Evening. Hope you all are doing well out there. My name is Rocco, and I am the livestock manager here at Living Web Farms. And I want to spend a little bit, excuse me, I want to spend a little bit of time with you this evening talking about livestock. Going over some things that I've learned, some experiences I've had. I'm hopeful to answer some questions if you have any. We can get into various species and types of feed, infrastructure, just kind of general animal husbandry. No question is too big or too small. I'll sure do my best to answer it. I got into livestock very gradually, about 12 years ago. We started with some chickens. My background before that had been organic vegetables. And I don't actually recall specifically what led us into chickens, but or why we decided to take the plunge and go ahead and get a couple birds. Probably just for the simple reason, and this I think is fairly common and certainly perfectly reasonable, to just have a couple fresh eggs of our own. And I ran down to a local little livestock get together. It wasn't really an auction or anything. It was just kind of some local folks selling some birds, and picked up a rooster and about half a dozen hens. and things have really kicked off from there. And we've done a lot with animals since then, and a fair amount of diversity with animals as well. Here at the farm, within that time frame, we have had a fair amount of laying hens. We've had a fair amount of broilers as well. We've done some breeding with some heritage breeds for both chickens and turkeys, as well as pigs. We finish out a fair amount of steers and grow them out as well. Excuse me. So I want to do my best to share any of that with you, and you know, maybe we'll get into a couple specific situations and maybe even a couple funny stories. Who knows? Who knows what the night will bring? One of the things as well over the years has been integrating livestock into our vegetable program, and as well as a cover crop management program, a fertility program. That's something that's been very exciting to do, and we've been able to do in the past 3 to 4 years, I'd say. This past year in particular, we were able to really bring a lot of multi-species livestock into a space that is, the follow plan was to grow vegetables in it as well. So bringing that kind of full circle has been really, really interesting as well. It's been really educational for me, and it's been a good little journey. We still have a lot to learn and a lot to explore with all those things. So I'm looking forward to that. I think we all on the farm are looking forward to getting into more of that. I certainly hope so. Thank you all for being with us. Let's see here.
So you got some questions?
I have a question. Says, do you have any meat sheep? We don't. We had sheep for a long time. We actually just this past year kind of got out of the sheep business, as I like to say. We got some sheep, I think we got them in 2011 or so. We got them out of a stock in Missouri. They were originally the ones that came here. We got 20 animals. We got 2 rams and 18 little ewes. And they were a mix of a St. Croix and a Florida native, those 2 breeds of sheep. You know, with a lot of that breeding, at least with the sheep, and we've worked with this with the cattle as well, some of the breeds coming from more tropical climate typically have a couple things going for them. They have heat tolerance, which in a high density grazing situation can be very helpful. You know, shade isn't always an option. And it's less that shade is or isn't an option, and it's more, it's nice to have the flexibility to work with animals who don't require shade as much as others. So getting some breeds that are appropriate to your area, and then to go further down that to select them and make them appropriate to your management style, that's been very helpful as well. The sheep went well for a long time. We were able to breed. We were able to select for the qualities and the traits that we want within our hair sheep. We eventually brought in some other genetics, and that proved helpful. There were some management decisions and some infrastructure stuff that, you know, kind of made me want to go in another direction. As far as the density or the stocking rate on our land and how frequently we move them, I imagine we'll get into that here after a while. Well, we will. I found it tricky to achieve the level of animal impact and the level of concentration and movement with the sheep. it was doable, but it's not as easy as cattle. And that is one instance where that's almost entirely because of infrastructure. We were using netting. We were using sheep, electrified portable sheep netting to move our sheep along. And we were trying to achieve a high level of animal impact and moving them every 12 hours, every 12 to 24 hours or so. And we drug a lot of nets around. We drug a lot of fencing around through the fields, and you know, it wasn't terrible or anything, but it really isn't comparable to one single strand of polywire or polybraid on a reel. It's like a big fishing rod, really, and you can set up a couple posts, and excuse me, the ability to put cattle where you want them is just so much easier with that kind of infrastructure. Having said all that, there are folks out there who have achieved managing their sheep with polybraid as well. I wasn't one of them. So we tried. We went from 3 strands to 2 strands. There's always going to be some scragglers who just kind of get out. And those are the ones that are kind of training the other ones and showing them the way, showing them that they can kind of get out of that system. So long story short, and it also, there was a couple other reasons. They didn't quite have the level of impact as a much larger animal like cattle would have. So we are out of the sheep business at the moment. I don't know that we won't get back into it. I do miss the diversity of it. Having as many species on your land is very helpful. It's helpful for the grass. It's helpful for the biodiversity. It's really helpful for the microbial life as well. So maybe we'll get back into it. But logistically, it's been a lot easier switching from sheep and getting back into cattle. So that's what happened with the sheep. We'll see what happens in the future. Our main program, as far as the livestock right now, and again, we've bred hogs in the past. We've bred heritage turkeys and chickens. Some years we focused on layers. Some years we focused more on broilers, and those things can fluctuate. Maybe you want to meet a certain market demand. Maybe you're trying some stuff out. Maybe you're just kind of finding your rhythm as a grower. I do like there is a lot of enjoyment for me personally in trying different things and trying different mixes with your animals and trying and putting that into your program. What we mainly, right now, we have 30 head of steers. We are operating them on about 25 acres. I say about because some of that grazing land we also share, and we work in conjunction with vegetable and cover crops. So there's some variation between how much of the land is available and scheduling. It's a lot more scheduling with the vegetable side of it, and how much is available and can be allotted for grazing when you're working vegetables into it as well, as opposed to just 18 acres of pasture, which is kind of always there, which we have that as well. So we're running 30 head, and then we follow those with chickens. We slowed down with layers. We don't have any broilers at the moment. We're hopeful to get some when things warm up a little bit here in a couple months into spring. We recently got a new batch of layers. We ordered in some day-old chicks. They're in the brooding house now. So they're growing well. They're starting to feather out. The big thing this time of year, at least where we are, it's not super frigid, but keeping those chicks warm, making sure your heat lamps are up and running, adjusting the height, and being observational with the birds as well. Getting into chickens kind of specifically now, but those little day-old chicks, when they show up, if having the heat on them from a heat lamp is very crucial, especially this cold time of year. If it's too low, if you go in there in your brooder, and it can be as big or as small, it doesn't matter, but if your lights are too low and you come and you see all your chickens are just on the outside of that light, then you might want to raise it up a little bit. And it's the same thing, if it's too high, you can find that they're all right under the concentrated light and they're all really close together. So you kind of want to be observational, you kind of want to play with that. What I do that's worked really well for me, we've got a little kind of an A-frame shed, but I hang the lights well, there's a nail from a rafter, but I hang the lights on a chain. And just those individual links, just to be able to stick it up one or stick it down one on a colder night, that's been really helpful as far as just adjusting that. I mean, that's just a little kind of trick you can do. Obviously, you can do whatever you want, but that's been real helpful for us over the years too, and that applies to their feed and their water as well. Excuse me. So getting those birds up and running and getting them having a good start in the brooder can be real important. A big thing as far as cold, it's less so much the placement of your lights and all that stuff. That's important, but the big thing that'll suck the warmth out of those small animals is the wind. I have found over the years that getting a draft out of your brooding house to help those chicks along, that can be real helpful as well. So that's something you might want to keep an eye on too, if that's something that you're into. I got a question here. Let's see. How many sheep per acre did you have? Excuse me. Let's see. I'll have to scratch my head on that for just a second. We weren't doing the vegetable integration with the animals then. So that's going to put us at about 18 acres of pasture. And I think at our peak, we were running, as far as animals, just under 100. I'd say 80, 70. I think 80 was our peak when we were in the sheep business. One thing with the grazing that we're also implementing, and something that I think that we're very much able to do. So our program now basically is, we've got this, So we've got these steers moving along. Right now we're moving them 4 times a day. That's what we shoot for. I mean, obviously things can happen and things can get in the way, but for the most part, we're moving 4 times a day, sometimes maybe 2 or 3. If we've got other things going on or we're busy at another location and can't get back there immediately. And it's less that we're keeping those animals in, and one of the things we're really doing is we're kind of keeping the rest of that grass out. And so what that can lead us into stockpiling, which is something that we've been doing for a while. It's a little tricky. So stockpiling is basically the act of, or the attempt, I guess I should say, to reserve some space in your pasture to grow grass that you're not going to, during the growing season, that you're not going to mess with, that you're not going to let your animals graze, you're not going to let them get on it, with the intention of grazing it in the winter, when what you have been grazing, whatever area that may be, has gone dormant, or you're getting to the heart of winter, which we're approaching now. And then it's kind of a substitute for hay. So now you've got this reserve, money in the bank, so to speak, of grass. And we did that with the sheep as well, and we are doing that with the cattle. It's nice to be able to maximize, this is what we're shooting for, this is the sweet spot, is to be able to maximize the amount of livestock we have, our stocking rate, with the amount of pasture we have, and do as little winter feeding as possible. It's always good to have some hay around. You're always going to end up feeding some hay in the winter. you know, take your pick. It's going to ice, it's going to snow, you're going to go away for Christmas, whatever. I'm not saying, you know, people have been feeding hay for a long time. There's nothing in and of itself wrong with feeding hay. But as far as cost, a very big cost for livestock can be winter feeding. So reserving some space to grow some stockpile. You know, when I started doing it, it was actually, it was at the end of August. I would just allot a certain amount of space and I just wouldn't touch it until after a couple frosts or until basically I ran out of whatever else I was actively grazing. Just this year, with these 30 head, we've been able to really let some of that land rest and grow a fair amount of stockpile. We've got some spots on our farm now where the animals haven't been grazed all year, and the year's nearly over. It's, you know, early December, so we're getting into that. We're getting into that as well, and I'm really looking forward to getting into that stockpile and seeing how long I can go before I have to get into it. We're still grazing. We're still grazing the space that I was calling active grazing, where we'd been all throughout the year. And it's fun. It's fun to see if you can go all winter and maintain your animals in good condition and buy as little hay as possible. It's a fun little kind of challenge every year. And, you know, it's nice to get closer to achieving that, which typically happens. But, you know, even in the beginning, we were really shooting for 300 days of grazing. And I think we'll be able to get at, you know, hopefully more into 350 or so, maybe 325 this year. So that's going to help a lot on our cost, because there's so much winter feeding and so much hay and supplemental feed that we don't have to bring in. Let's see what we have here. Just looking at a couple questions. Thank you guys for showing up on this little talk. It's pretty cool. Let's see. So we got a little profit per acre question. If someone has 5 acres versus 20, what animals have you found more profitable if you had to choose species due to limited space? That's a good question. The kind of rule of thumb is the smaller the space, the smaller the animal. If you don't have tons of acreage or anything, you know, chickens can be real profitable for broilers, for meat, Thanksgiving turkeys, eggs as well, layers. The ability to stack a lot of these enterprises as well can be really profitable, and it can be really, it can add a lot of diversity. And diversity to your land and diversity to the microbes and kind of a biological diversity, but also from a business point of view, you know, if you've got more enterprises out there, then you tend to kind of get rid of your risk and have more chances of something doing better. And I think that there can be room for you know, broilers and layers. You can do that kind of management. You know, the mountains here where we are, we're in western North Carolina. These aren't the great grasslands of America. We're in the mountains. And as much as I, you know, really enjoy working with cattle and worked a lot with sheep, I mean, in all reality, I think personally the sheep are better suited for this particular climate and for this particular area and just the topography of it as well. You know, this isn't vast, huge acreage. This is folks with typically maybe 10 acres, 20 acres, something along those lines, at least right here where I am. And, you know, if you've got, I'm just going to throw out some numbers, but if you've got 5 acres out there, you know, having 2 steers that are going to take 30 months to finish, probably, I shouldn't say probably, may not be the most profitable avenue, as opposed to if you've got 5 acres and then you're running, maybe you've got a dozen or 20 sheep, and you've got a little breeding program going, and you're selecting for the traits that you want and for the performance that you want on your land and things that are working for you, whatever they may be. Typically, that's going to be animals that stay in good body condition and ewes that breed back and that give you lambs every year. And then, you could reach a carrying capacity to where, you're all set. Figure out your stockpile or kind of whatever alternate feeding that you're doing so you don't have a crazy bill for feeding them throughout the winter. And, now maybe you're selling some lambs. Now maybe you're selecting some lambs to grow out and you've got some customers, so on and so forth. And if you had a little program like that, you could easily be doing 200, 300, 400 broilers a year on a 5-acre little program like that, I think. Or at least, let's say running 50 to 100 to 150 layers and do an egg program on that. So I hope that helps. Looking for ways to incorporate different species can be real helpful. You can also do some pastured pigs. Do you winter seed your pasture? No. I have never planted a seed. That's not entirely true, but for the most part, I've never really planted anything in the pasture, in our main pasture area. Historically, on the pasture that we're at, the land that we're grazing, there's the back 40, we call it. It's actually 4 acres, but my point is that it's on this back corner, and historically it had corn and soybeans there for quite a while. And there's this neat old picture, I don't know, from some previous owners or something, and it's an aerial shot. I think it's from back in the 90s. And you can see that where we're grazing now, excuse me, our main grazing area. And then that little corner where they were doing some row crops, and there's such a difference in that. And it was conventional, it was high tillage. I'm not saying anything bad about that. I'm just saying that area got a lot more attention, got a lot more tillage, got more conventional inputs than the rest of the farm. And still today, it is a little bit behind our main growing area. I've seeded in there. I have run a no-till drill in there, mainly to add diversity and then to get in there and graze it, and in an effort to increase some fertility. Increasing fertility through grazing and also through the diversity and through cover crops and all the good work that they do as well. Seeding, here's the long and short of it for seeding, for what I would say. We do it twice a year, basically. So typically we're drilling, using the seed drill. Typically we're drilling in September, late August, September, getting into October will still work, but you're getting a little late. Cool season crops, cool season cover crops for winter establishment. Let's say you get stuff in the first week of September. It's still plenty warm. You're still going to have some good rainfall, typically. That's all pretty dependent, but anyway, typically, so that's our plan. And then that stuff can germinate, get up, get established, get growing. Heart of winter comes, it doesn't die, but it goes dormant, it just kind of hangs out. And then we get into March, certainly in April, but March, it's spring, and it springs up with everything else. And then that can be harvested or grazed or whatever you feel like you want to do to terminate that cover crop. And then for warm season crops, we're typically drilling the month of May to get stuff growing and established for the summer. There's so many cover crops out there. We do a big blend. It's pretty rare that we do just one single species of cover crop. There are going to be applications where that can be helpful. You know, for the edges of fields, for example, or on our little vegetable plots where we are now, we've got some drive areas, little roads throughout the field, and you know, we did a lot of white clover and a ryegrass in there, just because it's kind of tough and hardy and can withstand equipment being driven on it, just to prevent erosion. So in order to prevent erosion in a road, you know, so we find what we want to achieve, and we work backwards from there with what we want to plant. Typically, what we want to achieve is increasing diversity and fertility building. So we've chosen to use a diverse mix of cover crops in the past for that. There are a lot of species out there, a lot of types out there. Basically, you're going to have a warm season grass, a cool season grass, a warm season legume, and a cool season legume. And that's a pretty broad stroke. There's a lot of diversity out there. There's a lot of things you can get into with that. You know, for the winter, do we seed the field for winter? We've seen fertility in the pastures increase over the years quite a bit, and we've seen diversity in the pastures increase quite a bit as well. We've gotten away from fescue. We used to have some problems with spiny amaranth, and you know, through this maximizing of animals and getting those animals all across the farm and having a lot of diversity with those animals. You know, typically I think, not typically, but what we're kind of from a point of view of really stepping back and looking, you know, it's a lot of rest in this little square foot in our pasture. And then we hit it hard with a heavy amount of animal impact, and we hit it hard with a bunch of different kinds of animals. And so there's this big rest period, and then there's this huge kind of mixing things up and a big disturbance. And then we come off of it and we let that recover. And that has really encouraged diversity in the seed bank that's already in our soil, and really helped to decrease on a lot of the weed pressure that was there, and maybe some stuff that's in there that we don't particularly want. Do we still have weeds? Yeah, sure, but we have a lot less now than we used to. We're seeing a lot of different grasses come up, and we've seen them come up throughout the year, so that's been helpful as well. Yeah.
Water, take a break, quick break.
Let's take one quick break. We'll be back real soon. All right, we're back. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Let's see. So I'm hopeful to do a class, or give a little, do a little chit chat about more getting into stockpile. That's something that we focus specifically on this year, and something I'm looking forward to. Because again, we've been growing a fair amount of our fields, every bit of half, that haven't had any animals on them all throughout the growing season. So we've got a fair amount of biomass and grass ready to roll. So I'm looking forward to getting into that and doing some calculations, space, how much space are you using to keep your animals in good condition, and then just planning that out and seeing, this is what I'm using today, this is how much of it I have, calculate how many days you've got. And that can be very helpful as well to know if you've, get an idea of how much hay that we'll be needing, or maybe it also helps with our stocking rate as well. Maybe you need to get rid of some animals, maybe you can afford to bring in some more animals. So that'll be fun. Hopefully you guys will be able to tune into that. I'd love to do a class on that here in the next 4 or 6 weeks or so. One of the things we did this year as well, I think I mentioned, we were able to move our cattle onto some land that we had grown specifically some cover crops on that we'd planted in fall of last year. So we grazed them this May, and we were able to move our cattle and our chickens through that ground, and then help them transition that and help them, we put a fair amount of gain on those animals. It was some really good stuff. I think of that particular blend was, 8 or 10 species of winter cover crops. One thing that we have, I'll tell you this, one thing that didn't work out for our vegetable program was vetch. Vetch is a winter cover crop. It's a legume. It's a beautiful plant. It's real viney. It's got these little leaves, beautiful purple flowers. But we were having a hard time terminating it in the spring and planting vegetables into it. So that's something that we removed from our program. But what we were able to do, so there's some calculations and there's some timing, and you kind of have to work backwards a lot more with the vegetable program than just with kind of a strictly grazing program. So after we grazed our cover crops, we were able to then plant a second batch of cover crops, or in some cases for some long season stuff like some corn or beans, then we could graze it off, plant directly into that, because those grains and those legumes are going to be in the ground a lot longer. So there's no issues with pathogens or anything like that. The general rule of thumb is for vegetable management anyway, and integrating vegetables and animals. For a vegetable that is above ground, you need 90 days between when an animal was last there and when you're harvesting that vegetable. For root crops or a vegetable in the ground, you need 120 days. So you can calculate that and work backwards if that's something that you're interested in. And getting that animal impact into a vegetable program was real exciting. The cattle and the chickens, and we had some sheep at that time as well. they're really able to transition that ground and make real good use of that cover crop, and they make a lot of the nutrition available and the nutrients available for the next up and coming crop. Even if that is a cover crop, then that one will do all the better, and then you're really cycling nutrients. So that's been an exciting bit that we were able to do this year, and I'm looking forward to doing more of it. Let's see what kind of questions we have here. We've got one about our winter. Are we having a warmer winter? Let's see. I'm trying to think. Every day, some days kind of melt into the other ones. So far this year, winter hadn't been that bad. We've had a couple cold snaps, nothing too crazy. It's kind of coming in like a lamb, as they say. We had a nice fall. We had a fairly dry fall, and it's kind of dry now. We could actually use a little shot of rain. But as far as the temperatures go, it's funny, here in western North Carolina, there's a lot of, in the mountains anyway, there's a lot of different little climates and different little things happening. So where we are, 30 miles north of us, it tends to be 5 to 10 degrees cooler. 30 to 40 miles south of us, it tends to be 5 to 10 degrees warmer. We've had a good winter thus far. It's been good. It's been pretty mild. We've had a couple good hard killing frosts by now. So that hasn't had too much of an effect on what we're doing. It's been pretty standard, so far so good. Let's see, I wonder if we can look at some pictures.
These are just random.
Yeah? Let's take a little glance. Well, there's the cattle. They just, that last picture there, they just arrived on the farm, and they were getting used to our new little system and getting used to everything there. There's some piggles. We bred pigs for quite a while as well. We worked with some heritage breeds of pigs. Originally it was Tamworth, and then we ended up trying to do some hybrid breeding, and we got a Hereford boar. He was a beaut too. That Tamworth boar was a beaut as well. The pig management for breeding, it was interesting. It's, a lot of times managing for breeding and managing for just growing can be real different management programs. So managing particularly with the hogs, so we were managing our boar and putting them with the sows at the appropriate time, making sure everyone's in good health, farrowing for the sows and getting them their own space to have the piglets and do their thing, and then keeping those piglets warm. We found that putting a heat lamp in the corner, we just have this, we have a shed, and it's a 90-degree corner. We were able to lock it off there, just a 45-degree, and put a light right in the corner where the piglets could go in there and get warm and get a little space for mama. Her rolling over on piglets, that was something that happened, but providing them with, especially the first week or so, providing them with with a little space where they can go and kind of get away from mom for a second and just come to her for nursing. That was real helpful for us as well. And we had a couple, I remember at least twice. One time in particular, we had a sow. She was pretty, gorgeous, in good condition. She was ready to farrow. She was ready to have her babies. And I had that little shed all done up for her. I did all the nesting, and I put a bunch of hay in there and let her do whatever she wanted and all this stuff. And I thought in the past they'd gone in there and made themselves a nest and kind of bedded down. And it was getting really close to the time where she was supposed to have her babies. And sure enough, she never went in there. And I kept thinking, well, gee whiz, it's getting about time. She should be in there nesting and blah, blah, blah. And then I went out there and was looking around and said, boy, she's got to be real close. And she wasn't in there at all, hadn't been in there at all. I said, well, what's going on? What's that? What did I hear? Sure enough, I hear little squeaks go out in the woods. And she did all the nesting stuff and all the things that I thought she was going to do, but she didn't do it in the shed. She went off in the woods and got under a stump and made this nest and just had him out on pasture, had him out there right off in the little wooded area. And man, those piglets did great. And, actually come to think of it, just to give you a little story real quick. So that happened twice. And the first time it happened, I remember one of my coworkers, I had just met him, and he's a good friend now, and he and I work closely together. But anyway, I said, man, these little piglets are out here and they're all exposed, and if it rains, I'm so worried they're going to get cold or they get chilled, or what if we get a big rain and all this other stuff, and maybe they'll run off, or maybe the other pigs are going to fool with them and all this stuff. So we went there, and it was about 3 or 4 of us. And I think I distracted Mom, and I was bringing her some feed over here, and I kind of lured her away. And we snatched up all those piglets, and we ran as quick as we could, and we put them in that little shed. Because it was undercover, it had that light, it had some protection. It was what I thought would be better for her, is the point I'm getting at. And, so we're running through the woods carrying all these 3 or 4 or 5 piglets and all this stuff, and she's chasing us and barking at us, and she's right on our heels, and it was, a little adrenaline moment and all this stuff. Come back the next day, I didn't lock her in there. Come back the next day, she's right outside with all her piglets, hanging out with all the other pigs, right where we left her. So that was I probably got a dozen stories like that. But my point is that was a good lesson for me. Probably one of the best pieces of advice I've ever heard as far as livestock go, that rings true again and again and again. I'm never going to know what an animal wants more than the animal itself. So it becomes my job to observe and to try and get it as close as I think they want it, and to observe. See how they're performing, see how they're acting, checking on not only their performance and their body condition, but just kind of their stress levels in general, making sure that those are real low by giving those animals what they need. And then what's been interesting over the years is learning more and more about that throughout the different species of animals, and then applying, the business of it, and trying to maximize production, trying to minimize inputs, and trying to work in correlation with all those things. But that's one reason I really do love working with animals. They all have their own little personalities and their own little things that they're real capable, and it becomes important. It became important for me to, again, try and give them what I think would be best for them, and then see what they think about that, see how they react to that, see how they're doing with that, and adjust accordingly. So, every day we're out there checking them out, making sure that they've got what they need and that they're happy. And that happiness and low stress level for the animals equates perfectly to their performance. They do better. They have better, the sheep, for example, they had a lot better lambs throughout the year, getting our lambing season in accordance with when we wanted it as well. We lambed when we were doing the sheep about the second week of May is when we were lambing. The last trimester of the pregnancy for the ewes. We had, before the middle of May, we were getting into April, had a lot of green grass so their nutrition could get up. The weather had settled. It's pretty warm here by then, but not too hot yet. And then a couple, 4 or 6 weeks or so after the births, when they, when moms are making milk and they need a lot of that nutrition as well, they had a lot of good grass then as well. So, excuse me. Anyway, observation, I can't say enough about it, and trying to suit your needs to the animals and suit the animals' needs to you, and there's a little bit of give and take there, but that's what makes it fun. Let's see about some more questions. Do you use nutrient blocks, and do all the animals share the same set? We use free choice minerals. They have an 8 or a 16 mineral program, and the term for it, they call it cafeteria style. It's like a buffet. So we have a mineral feeder with these different compartments in it, and then the minerals are more specific, as opposed to a general mineral mix where maybe they need one specific mineral, but they're getting all these others, which isn't really bad for the animal, but it can be kind of wasteful because they're taking up stuff that they don't need, and so it just passes out of them. So we use a free choice mineral program. They all do share it. It was funny too when we had the sheep and the cattle together, having a mineral feeder that was multi-species. The cattle can be a lot heavier and a lot bigger, and they just kind of raise up. They sniff around in it and they raise it up with their nose. They're big blocky animals. Those sheep can be, especially those smaller ones, can be a lot. They're a lot smaller, a lot slender. They're not as big as a cow, basically, is what I'm saying, obviously. But so having a mineral feeder that could satisfy both of those species was fun for a second. I remember the first one I built, it was flat, and it had hinges, and it was watertight to keep the water out and all this stuff. And I drug it out there, and I stood there beside it, and I watched the sheep lift it up. And actually what I used for a roof, I had an old bed liner out of a pickup truck, that hard but light plastic, durable. And that was the frame that I used for it to keep the water out. And it was flat, and it would just hinge up. And I drug it out there, and I watched these sheep get in there and get some minerals and check them all out. And I was like, hey, great, this is gonna work really, really well. And then, I didn't get 30 steps out of the paddock, and I turned around just to glance over my shoulder. And there must have been a dozen sheep on top of that thing, just any little advantage, any little height they could get. They love to play around and jump around and get up on stuff and check stuff out. So they were all over that thing, and they had it destroyed within 24 hours. So that didn't work. But anyway, so we ended up just putting a slope on it. But that's just a little story about that, So we use a mineral feeder, different compartments. Free Choice Enterprise, they're out of Minnesota, and they're very knowledgeable and very helpful group of folks. Let's see. That looks like.
That's Sean and Beth Doherty from one of our workshop videos.
Oh, I think I remember them. There's some pigs on pasture. They do love doing that. There's some Shona and some broom sedge.
And some of these photos are from Jim.
Yeah, some of these are from there's some sheep and a donkey. There's some netting. That's what that was all about. We had a donkey, he's still there. He's been there ever since I've been there. He came with the farm. So livestock guardians with the sheep, that's been real helpful to have him around. I've never lost a sheep. I've never lost a lamb to a predator. Or if I have, I don't know about it, I guess I should say, but I haven't. We had 5 strands of electric fence around our perimeter, high tensile, 12.5 gauge fencing to a charger, a pretty powerful charger. People have asked me in the past, hey, what kind of charger should I get? Or hey, I have this many acres. Get the biggest, baddest charger you can afford is my advice, especially if you are running sheep. They're light on their feet, they got a big wool coat. They really need to feel that bump. But also, I think that was a big contributor to keeping coyotes and dogs and stuff out of our fields as well, especially around lambing season when there's a bunch of that going on and a bunch of little bitty lambs around that would make pretty easy targets. And I think that the donkeys have helped a lot with that. When I was a kid, we had some dogs, some livestock guardian dogs. We didn't have any livestock. That's kind of a whole different story. But anyway, I do get some questions now and then about folks asking about livestock guardian dogs. I personally am a supporter of that. I've not worked with Anatolians or Kangals. I have in the past, but I've not done it in the realm of agriculture. But livestock guardian dogs, I think, are great because I like seeing those animals get used for what they were bred for and keeping that trait going throughout the breeds. But if you get a big bad dog, just be careful. Make sure if you've got a lot of people coming on your farm to check it out, just be careful. It can be a little bit of a challenge. I will say it can be a little bit of a challenge to get a dog that understands the difference between threats, as far as something coming to eat your chickens or your what have you. So just I like those livestock guardian dogs. Just make sure you get a good one, and that's a whole other kind of management thing as well. Excuse me. The biggest issue we've had with predators, by far, has been chickens. And it's really hawks and falcons. And more specifically, it's really that in the winter when there's not as much food around and things are pretty bare and those chickens really stand out. Just the other day, I let the birds out in the morning. Our laying flock, it was out on the farm. It's probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. I mean, it still goes on. And, went out, did my other chores, started my day, come back to get eggs, just check out the layers after a little while. And there wasn't a chicken out there. I was thinking, oh man, where all my chickens run away? What's going on? And sure enough, went around the corner and there was a falcon, eating a hen. That stuff happens. And we did. So anyway, I ran that falcon off and then he came back, and then I ran him off and he came back, and then the rooster decided he wanted to be a tough guy, and then the rooster and the falcon got into it and they chased each other and it went all day long, and it was this back and forth of, watching this pretty beautiful bird, but, he's trying to get down on all these chickens too. So I'm like chasing them off and running them off and trying to get the rooster back in the chicken house and all this other stuff. But my point is that, those things happen. They still happen to me. Reflective tape has helped. Pulling out all the tricks, I think, has been helpful. One thing we were able to do, I just went to Goodwill or wherever I went. I got an old tape, an old VHS tape, took it apart, tied one in, ran it out, put a twist in it, ran it out, put a twist in it, tied it over there on the other side of the chicken yard. So it's just big reflective tape with a couple twists in it. It turns in the wind, and that reflection from the sun, that reflection can scare them away. We put out for a time some old, some old mirrors or CDs, stuff like that. Just that reflective stuff can really deter those birds of prey. And for quite a time, we had geese with the chickens as well. There are some breeds of geese specifically that are more, I don't want to say capable, but seem to be more helpful with keeping those birds of prey away. I can't sit here and list them. I don't really recall them off the top of my head. But if you're having some issues with that, I would recommend some geese. Those are very helpful as well. In fact, we're kind of in the market for some. So maybe, if I'm able to pick some up for these new chicks that are in the brooder now and get them developed and get them growing and put them with this flock. And if we have success with that, I'll be sure and get that information out there, at least with what kind of breed of goose that we went for. Geese are awesome, big, loud, mean, scary, loud geese. And I've seen, I've seen hawks fly over. The geese see them, they squawk. All the chickens go, they hide. And I've also seen geese, approach birds and other animals that have come into the chicken flock, looking for a fight, looking to defend. So that can be very helpful as well. A lot of times when you do have, if you are having some issues with predation, if you have some kind of guardian in there, even that alone will really help discourage a predator. If you got mice in your house and you get a cat, a lot of the mice will go away. It's kind of as simple as that. I'm not saying it'll prevent it totally, but it'll help. So if you're having any kind of issues like that, hopefully getting some diversity in your flock or some diversity out on your pasture. Again, like with the donkeys and the sheep, I've very rarely I haven't had any issues with any predators, and I really attribute that to having those donkeys there. Because I don't have any doubt that coyotes have walked around and been there and smelled the air and wanted to go in, but they see those donkeys in there and they think, man, it's not really worth a fight. I'm just going to move on. So that's been helpful as well. And those are all also adding diversity to your soils and to your management as well. So that's been great. Yeah. I'm trying to think if I've got any little funny, let me tell you a quick story real quick about livestock if I can. I'll have to scratch my head on it. Let's see if we have any more questions. I do get questions now and then about horses, and I'm the wrong guy to ask. I don't have a lot of experience with horses and their nutrition or anything like that. Just kind of throwing that one out there. They haven't really played a part in our management system on our farm. So just kind of throwing that one out there. I see a little thing here about horses. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what if we took 5 real quick? Would that be acceptable?
And if anybody can think of a question.
Yeah, if you guys got any questions out there, feel free to shoot them, feel free to put them out there. I'll try and get to them and tell you everything I know about it. All right, everybody, we're back. So we had a couple questions get called in. And I've got one here about parasites. That's a big one. Do you have much problems with parasites with your animals? We don't. We don't have a lot of problems with parasites with our animals because we have bred, to the best of our ability, we've bred out the animals that have problems with parasites. We don't worm. We don't use pharmaceuticals. We have had issues with parasites in the past. But what we've done, we've selected for the animals who are performing well and who are staying healthy and not succumbing to parasites. I've lost a lot of sheep to parasites. A lot of them who weren't performing and who were getting issues. So it's important to see that and see that in your flock or your herd or your birds or your pigs even, and get those animals out, get them off, get them out of the rest, get them away from the rest of the animals, separate them, get them treated, and get them off the farm. That's been our best strategy for developing resistance in our animals. What we're shooting for is parasite-resistant animals, not, pharmaceutical-resistant parasites. That's what we're shooting for with our animals. And that was a big theme for us. And if it's a big theme for you, I want to say this. If you're going to make the commitment to not be doing a lot of parasite treatment, then you might find that you're going to have to draw a hard line. That's something that we had to do. We buckled down about 3 or 4 years into the sheep, and we buckled down hard and said, look, we're not going to have any animals here that are having issues with these worms. We're just not going to do it. And if we've got a big, beautiful little lamb or a new animal or whatever the case may be, if there's some beautiful animal but it's got issues with parasites, it can't live here. And I had to draw that hard line and I had to really commit to it. And there was a year there where we culled out a pretty fair amount of animals, a lot more than I'd wanted to. And my only regret, looking back on that, is that I didn't do it sooner, because we really lost a lot of, we really tackled a lot of issues that we were having with the parasites. It's just something that we made a commitment to, is to not use those wormers and to develop animals that were resistant. Animals on our land that are resistant to the parasites that are on our land, all working with the plants that are growing on the land, and they're all performing well with that. That's the least amount of input and the highest amount of output that we've hoped to achieve, and we really are doing pretty well with it now. The cattle that we have now are very resistant. Good heat tolerance, very resistant to parasites. And if you've got an animal on your farm and you're committed to not doing, if you're committed to not worming, if you've got an animal on your farm that's having some problems, get him or her off and get them off, get them treated. You have to do that for good husbandry. You can't just, let them suffer, but you don't have to keep them around if they're not working for you. And you're going to have to figure that out for yourself, depending on how big that number is. But as far as, getting established and getting started, especially with livestock, there isn't tons of equipment. There isn't tons of tractors or implements or anything like that. If you've got a good fence, let's say for cattle, we just, on this vegetable ground, we just built some fencing this past year. It's 3-strand high tensile electric fence. Again, that 12.5 gauge. And we were able to, we were lucky in all reality, because we had a fair amount of locusts around, but we were able to get and harvest a lot of our own posts and get get that fencing up and get that infrastructure up. And then we were also able to get water. One thing about this rotational grazing, getting these animals all over the place, is that water, you got to make sure that water follows them. Typically, we set up a paddock, and again, at the moment now, so we're moving 4 times a day. So when they come into an area, they're going to move 4 times. And we set the water up here, so we're moving them 4 times. Let's call this our back fence. So it's actually 16 moves, because it's a 4-day period where this grass, where they first got in, starts to regrow, and it needs to have that rest. And that's how often that we move our back fence. So every 4 days we're moving that. So every 4 days, wherever we're going, that water has to follow. We've used totes. We've used some bins and just fill them up and put them on automatic waterers. The point I'm getting at is that some infrastructure, making sure you have some mobile water, and then starting with some good stock for your animals, or at least getting the best of what's available to you, determining what you want for your land and for your management program, and then sticking with that through your breeding program and keeping those animals around. So you're building resistance and you're building production into your program with what you've got going for you. That's, I think, the best place to start. And I think that's a good way to get started as well. And if you can ease into it as far as getting started and ease into that management system where you're not super dependent on bringing in a bunch of feed because you have too many animals, and you feeling comfortable with your infrastructure. As far as moving them, the cattle, so we have temporary posts. They're just, you put a bunch of them up on your shoulder and you walk around, you just stick them in the ground. You prop them up, stick them in the ground with your foot, and then you're running this, again, that reel with the poly line on it that you can attach to your perimeter fence, and then that makes that electrified. The animals learn quickly not to challenge it. They'll hit it once or twice. Every now and then they'll accidentally hit it. You'd be surprised that they really don't challenge it. It doesn't take long for them to learn to respect that. So we're using really what we're using is a mental barrier to achieve that herd effect and achieve that high level of animal impact. And we can, you can set up a paddock for cattle. I mean, basically, if you're doing it 4 times a day and there's not a whole lot to it, just physically putting posts in the ground and running a line, you can do it as fast as you can walk. A lot of times it takes us longer to walk out to where the cattle are than it does to actually move them when we get there. And it's not a long walk either. It's another thing I've heard in the past as well. Oh, you're moving them 4 times a day, or you're moving them twice a day. Gee whiz, it's so much work. I disagree. It's really not that bad. In fact, it's you get good infrastructure, get it laid out. It's pretty encouraging because it really isn't that much work. And it's always really pleasant to move your animals. And they really like moving. They really like that new, fresh consumption and just getting into that new spot. And, we were timing it right where we don't want our animals hungry, but we want them ready. And so those are some of the benefits of rotational grazing that we've seen, and we're working with these animals. So when they come into a new paddock, we're looking for anywhere from 80 to 90%, almost like a total graze, to where they're consuming pretty much everything that's there. And so that's a lot of intake, it's a lot of forage moving through the animal, and the space that we've had to give them. If, for example, we just let them have the whole range and just said, let's do, 1 cow for 2 acres, and we've got 30 acres, so let's go out and get 15 cows and just let them walk around. I mean, we're running 30 head on 20 acres. And again, I'm really looking forward to the stockpile thing because I don't think we're going to have to buy a whole lot of hay this year. And a lot of that, and not a lot of it, I mean, practically all of that is because of management. And a lot of that is because of this high level of animal impact, which again, concentrates the animal impact, concentrates the fertility. And if we're grazing 90% or more of our forage, and then what doesn't get grazed gets trampled, you know, if the animals don't eat it, the microbes will. And then so now we've got so much more sunlight coming down and hitting the growing points of all that grass that we end up growing more grass. And in the bare spots over the years too, excuse me, you know, you'll have a clump of grass here and a clump of grass here and a clump of grass here, and you have all this space in the middle. That space is filling up because that space is receiving more sunlight. And that space is germinating more grass in the seed bank. And the seeds that are germinating lend themselves to the type of management that is happening above ground. So there's a nice cycle there, and there's a nice little sweet spot to all of that. But I hope I didn't get too far off track. Good infrastructure, making sure that your animals have, you know, the water and the minerals that they need, and then determining what you want out of those livestock, out of your animals, and developing your management program to reflect that. It's a really great place to start, and it's a really great place to build from. Excuse me. Excuse me. One thing that I do want to discuss as well, is handling livestock. It can be fun and challenging when you've got multi-species out there. You know, if you're running pigs and chickens together, or cattle and sheep, and you know, throw a couple donkeys and geese and turkeys and all this other stuff. All these animals have their own little language, so to speak, and you kind of have to learn it. And it can be like managing kind of a room full of kids or something. But when we were moving all those animals, you know, you have to, learning animal husbandry and how to handle and move your animals is kind of like learning another language, really. And it's a lot to do with your presence, the energy that you bring, and just the physicality of it and where you are in relation to them, you know, how you approach them and how you handle all of them. Those things become a lot less of an issue, or I'll say a lot less of a problem, when you're dealing with your animals very frequently. And they get real used to the routine, they look forward to the routine, and there's pretty rare that we have that we have some livestock that doesn't behave or acts out or anything like that. And if you find that does happen, and if you find if it's a problem for you, you know, you might want to consider getting rid of that animal. And you'll certainly get some unruly ones in there every now and then. And, you know, again, getting back to that management program, if that's not working for you and if that's not what you want at your place, they can't live there. And that's just about drawing that hard line and committing to it. I spoke a little earlier about planting and getting grasses established. You know, again, I think that starting with some good stock and some good infrastructure is really important and very helpful. But getting a grass established, you know, that's something that I can't really speak a whole lot on. I mean, we've planted plenty of cover crops. We've planted plenty of annual seeds. Haven't done a lot of perennial planting. we've done a little bit. Really what we've been able to do is work with what was already there and try and improve on that. And that, again, goes into that philosophy of kind of low input. So with whatever you have, and the rainfall you have, and fertility, whatever you've got, the benefits of well-managed and diverse rotational grazing can and will improve what you already have. And I don't know that there's a limit to that. I don't know that that can stop. It's truly something that can get better and better every year. And you can grow more forage, higher quality stuff that your animals perform well on. And then, that can up your carrying capacity as well. The cover crop thing, that's a little different. That's an annual that we're planning for specific purposes. Again, typically for us, it's for building fertility and maximizing diversity. If you're planning a warm season cover crop, get your timing right. Again, late spring, early summer. I don't know what rainfall can be like in your area, but getting those seeds established and having enough rainfall and letting that stuff get established and letting it get up enough to develop and to reach its maturity before you graze it, it's been very helpful for us. And allowing those plants, and really in the stockpile ground as well, which isn't so much cover crop, but they apply to both the perennial and the annual. Allowing those plants to really reach their maturity allows them to cycle a lot of nutrients, to really go full circle with their photosynthesis, and putting more seeds back into the seed bank as well, and refreshing that seed bank as well. The cover crop thing it's been very helpful for specific fertility boosts. But again, I'll stick to my guns there. As far as establishing grass, I think if that's something you're concerned with, it may be less trying to bring stuff in and get something growing that you want there. I think a little less that and a little bit more working with what you already have and working with animals that can perform on that, and selecting for performance on your ground and in your specific needs and your specific goals as well. Excuse me. Let's see. Do you supplement with any extra dry hay in the field? Yeah, we have. So that's a good little segue. So one thing about cover crops, fertility, we kind of already covered that. If there's some hay around, or if we can get some inexpensively, one thing I will do at some point in the year is take the animals to a spot that is lacking or needs some fertility, and maybe needs some extra carbon, some extra manure. And I'll let them eat there, and I'll let them graze there, and I'll leave them in there for a while. I'll leave them in there specifically so I can feed hay. And so again, we're looking for what we're trying to achieve and work backwards. If I'm trying to build fertility on a certain spot of the farm that's lacking in fertility, I'm not trying to be super efficient with my hay. It's kind of the opposite. I feed it kind of loosey-goosey. I move it, but I spread it around right out in the dirt, right out on the grass, right outside. Let them eat what they want. They always pick through it. They always trample on it, especially if it's winter and cold. They bed down on it. But I'm getting that fertility and getting that carbon out on the soil, getting it down, and supplementing that. So they're getting some supplemental hay or feed as well. But I'm also using it specifically to build fertility by getting more organic matter out on the ground. So that's one little strategy we use. And, you know, I mean, I've gotten into plenty of Februaries and run out of grass, just to be clear, and had to feed hay. And I don't have a huge problem with that. That's not been a huge issue. Winter feeding can get real expensive. So it's less about, oh, I never want to winter feed, and it's more, I just want to minimize the amount of time that I have to do this. And when we are feeding outside, it's the same thing. I kind of tend to focus on areas of the farm where we can move the animals to and leave them in there and feed that hay in there. And let them get that hay out and let them get that stuff spread. We've done plenty of feeding in the barn in the winter as well. I find that winter feeding, you can get such a concentration of resources and nutrients in that barn if your animals are just there constantly, they're in a small space. And I'll say that they eat more efficiently and they make better use of the amount of hay that you have. And they have less ability to trample it and less ability to spread it, especially because then you can get in a barn and start using feeders that are just in and of themselves more efficient. And there's nothing wrong with that. It didn't work for us specifically. It's the effort to feed them in there and then the added effort, because now you've got a concentration and now you've got to get it all out and get it spread, get it dealt with, muck out your barns. We have preferred, we've worked with all that in the past, and we've preferred to let those animals do that out on the range themselves. And we found it more efficient and more effective than a concentrated feeding environment. And then we've got to take that all out and compost it or muck out our barns or just deal with that heavy concentration. Again, what do you need? What do you need on your place? Maybe you want some material for compost. Maybe, there's plenty of people who specifically feed in the wintertime feeding in a barn, in a covered area, in a space like that, specifically so they can have all that bulk of nutrients and put that into their fertility program as well. If that's something you need, it's a great tool. It's a great way to do it. It's a great strategy to give yourself the resources you need to do the things you want to do on your farm. Hay and winter feeding, it's going to happen, and I think you just need to think about how you want to have it go down on your place and how to have that suit your needs for your farm. Let's see here. Do I find that ground, let's see, I've got a question here. Do you find that ground holds rain better doing this? I find that ground holds water better the more fertile it is and the more biologically active it is. And I find that I don't particularly want to go down a whole global warming thing, or climate change, I should say, excuse me. Our dry times seem to be getting drier. Our wet times seem to be getting wetter. There seems to be more space, more time in between those instances. The big thunder showers now, or a little wet spell now, is wetter, it seems like, than it used to be. And our dry patches now are drier than they used to be. All of which leads me to, the more I do this and the more I'm starting to learn and continue learning, it's not so much how much rain, it's not how much rain you get, it's how much rain you can hold. The more fertile your land, the more water retention you have, and the more water you can hold and you can keep there and you can keep from running off. And that moisture stays more available there throughout the year. Less runoff, less, all the things that runoff brings and floods and carrying nutrients with them. So the more fertile the ground, and the more biologically active, the more, excuse me, the more aggregation and aggregates we get in our soil, the more microbial and macroorganisms that we have, the more earthworms, the more dung beetles, and the more diversity that the rotational grazing brings, building that fertility, feeding those microbes and adding to that food web, we're able to hold and retain a lot more water as well. It's just another little added advantage. I also find that the concentration of the animals gets a lot of hoof impact. And so whereas before, again, if they're spread out, just kind of out doing their own thing, you get a lot less concentration. They're really picking and choosing. They're selectively grazing what they want. They're grazing the grasses. They're grazing the forbs that they want first. They're going to keep going back to that. That leads to overgrazing. Overgrazing isn't, I'll get into that in a second. I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole quite yet. The concentration of animals leads to more hoof prints, and those more hoof prints. So I've got these little divots all over the place, and they eventually go away and all that. But just these little pockets, it's amazing. After a decent rain, I've got, hundreds and hundreds of little ponds out there, capturing that water, slowing down the flow, giving more resistance to runoff, holding it there, and then it's able to percolate, and it's able to stay in the ground. It's able to stay there longer, and then it can percolate more because it's not running off. So that's been another advantage as well. I was saying about overgrazing. Excuse me, that's more specifically when you've got a plant that gets grazed and it gets regrazed before it has time to fully recover, that stress leads to overgrazing. We had, when this farm was purchased, the pasture land that we're at now, it was an open field. There were, I think, 6 head of cattle and a horse out there. And it's funny, it kind of just now went away, but there was a path, a hard path that went from the barn to the woods. The barn, they kept the salt block and water. The woods, they'd go over there. Animals a lot of times like cover, they like shade. And it was across the field, so there was just this path. Over here's the woods, over here's the barn. And it was real compact. And like I said, it just now went away. It followed the contour kind of perfectly, but it's just now starting to go away. But it was there for years. You could see it. You could walk out there and just see a path through the field. And that was the result of, let's say an animal walking along that path 365 days a year, as opposed to, and so doing that constantly, that led to compaction of the soil in that area. And having them go selectively graze and eat the plants that they wanted that best suited them selectively before those plants had time to recover from getting grazed just a little while ago, that can lead to overgrazing. And that animal walking on that path the same every day, that led to compaction. So overgrazing and compaction are real similar in that regard. Look at it the other way. Look at, instead of one animal 365 days, look at 365 head on a piece of ground, maybe 3 days out of the year. And that's really what we're going for, is again, long rest period, short but very intense active grazing period, high levels of animal impact, the grazing action, the hoof action, the defecation, and then a long recovery period. That is what's built a lot of fertility for us and grown a lot more grass and, again, increased our diversity. We've also seen, when I first started, speaking about recovery period, don't quote me on this, But, you know, it was about 60 days during the growing season before, you know, I'm doing this high level of impact and I started to go off. You know, the space typically stays the same. But now we're dealing with some time. How long is it before I can go back to where I started? How much land do I have left that I didn't get into yet? When we first started, that was about 60 days. Now, you know, it's 45. Again, 80, 90% grazing, total grazing, as much as we can get. So we have as much of what's available for the animals consumed, as little trampled, as much sunlight hitting the soil surface, as much sunlight hitting the growing tips, and then letting that recover. And again, that's come back to about 45 degrees, come back to about 45 days. And when I say recover, it's when those grasses are growing and they're just starting to think about sending out a seed head. And the bottom leaves, the original leaves, are just starting to yellow. And that's going to fluctuate, and that is going to depend on rainfall and whatnot. But we have seen a steady decrease in our recovery time. And so now I'm effectively, you know, I've got 15 more days of growth and rest, and I'm just growing, we're able to grow that much more grass ahead of the animals. So again, either that goes into stockpile, or you can increase your stocking rate as well, if you can achieve that. But that's been very helpful as well. The fertility program and the adaptation, you know, that's going to come back down to your grazing management and how you get all that going together. So again, we've got, you know, our cattle are coming in, and it's funny, one of the first things was, do we still have sheep, and we don't. I'd like to get back into sheep. If I could get the sheep to stay with one single strand of wire that's at the level of cattle, which is higher than the sheep, then, you know, I think I'd like to do it. And I think that can be achieved as well. But again, so just that as a little example. So what I'm going to have to do is say, all right, I want sheep. We get these sheep out here. I want to run them with the cattle. And I'm going to have to select for sheep that don't leave the herd, that feel the safety in the numbers, and they stay right with those cattle. Or also, you know, try and train them to a single land of polywire, a single strand of polywire. But anyway, we'll see what happens with that. But that diversity, I can't say enough about it. For quite a while as well, we were able to put chickens and pigs together. Not so much our pigs that we were using for breeding, but our growers that we were using to finish out. Chickens and pigs get along beautifully. You know, a low waterer that they both can reach. I put a cage over the top so the pigs don't jump in. Had a chicken tractor, put the chicken food in it. It was about 2.5, 3 feet up off the ground. Pigs are exceptionally light on their feet. They're very quick. They'll surprise you. But they don't exactly have a great vertical. They're not big jumpers. So, you know, put the chicken feed in the house. The pigs couldn't jump up in there. And then right behind the chicken tractor, we had this little pig house, basically a pig tractor, low, wide. They could go in there and just get out of the elements for a second. But it was also important, we had a pig feeder on the inside of that, where you had to lift a lid. Chickens can't pick up the lid on the pig feeder, but the pigs can. Pigs can't jump in the chicken house to eat the chicken food, but the chickens can. So we drug them along, and it was real easy. And, you know, if I knew I needed to move them, at least with the pigs, I could just lock off that feeder for a couple hours, let them get a little hungry, open the door, open the feeder, they go in to eat, close the door behind them, hook it to the chicken tractor, hook the chicken tractor to our tractor, go out, drive along, put them wherever I want them, and they'd follow the sheep and the cattle. That worked really well for us. And again, it all comes back into, I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, but it comes back into our management program and our fertility program and having that diversity there. And it's been very helpful. It's been a good management system for us. And now, like I say, we're incorporating some vegetables into it, figuring that out, and trying to incorporate everything and hit that sweet spot where everything intermingles and everything is benefiting from one another. Well,
We start wrapping up, we got about 6 minutes.
okay. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that I've answered some questions. I don't know that I got too specific, but maybe there's some good info out there for you. If not, maybe we'll do another one. Or if so, maybe we'll do another one. How about that? That's what I should say. Thank you all very much for showing up. And I wish you all the best luck. And keep your chin up. Thank you all very much.
Check out our website, livingwebfarms.org.
Be sure and check out our website, livingwebfarms.org.